right, man.
Hello.
Good to see you, Garrick Regner. How's it going, man?
It's good. It's it's finally gotten cold and wintry here in Granada. It's
And they lit the
Christmas lights, yeah.
Lit the lights. What's the proper? I'm in language learning mode, and so now I question everything I say.
Speak badly. The Christmas lights are on. It's Advent. Happy Advent. For those who celebrate Advent. I grew up in a pretty,
which I would hope would be most of our listening audience, but I don't know. I grew up not celebrating Advent.
Yeah, I grew up not selling. I think it's more in mode. That's not I was thinking in Spanish de moda. It's more pop. It's more like in style.
Yeah.
It's more in mode.
The funny thing is when you said in mode, I was like, I don't know what. I went quiet here because I've been trying to figure out what's wrong with that. Because
there's something.
We both speak a. Well, the only word that comes to mind isn't a family programming word, but a less than legitimate form of English. An illegitimate form of English.
Illegitimate
is the PC word to say.
Illegitimate. Yeah, it's been roughed up by other languages.
Yeah, so Advent though is in style these days.
Yeah, I think more people. It's more of a when we were.
It's a good thing.
Yeah, I think it is. I like when I became Presbyterian, that's a big deal in the Presbyterian church. There's more of a liturgical, more of a church calendar, and so Advent's really big. And then also, what the lead up into Easter is fairly big. They even do Ash Wednesday and things like which originally when you grew up in kind of low church, free church, Baptist or independent Bible church kind of evangelicalism, all that stuff was, when I grew up, was kind of seen as like the mark of
the beast.
The mark of the beast, but it was seen as a mark of like religiosity, right? Or of too much. And I think it's a fair critique. I think there's a fair critique there.
Sure.
But at the same time, it misses a little bit of the mark of what we're really trying, what's happening in that preparation time of like and some of that liturgical, or putting that the belief into kind of more of a actual tangible experience. I think that's some of that is missed out on that. Some of that's good. There's definitely a excess both ways. That
I'm of the opinion that there was a reason that the Catholic Church decided to organize itself into a liturgical calendar and make sure that everyone could no matter where you were, at what church in the world, on what day, you were going to have the same schedule and everything else. It's funny because I've been listening to Mars Hill, the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, which maybe we should do a podcast. I don't know if you've listened to it, but maybe we should talk about that sometime.
I've read about it. But,
it'd be a fact, because I think there's tons of lessons to learn there. But and not in a gossipy way, Mark Driscoll, and look, there were good things that went on there. But it's funny because part of the critique of Mars Hill is this a little bit of, hey, we're going to try to produce basically the same content. So no matter what, we're branding. That's the way, that's the American way of saying it. And, we're going to make sure
Starbucks
same product, no matter where you go, and all these different things. And that's the overly cynical marketed way of saying what they were trying to do. But it occurred to me as I was listening to it, I was like, well, isn't that kind of what the Catholic Church was trying to do too? Like putting in a liturgical calendar. And I realize that there's huge differences. So I don't want to, I'm painting with a very wide broad brush here. But I just think it's fascinating how there's actually a lot of really good stuff with liturgical calendars and trying to make sure that you're doing it in such a way as to teach your people. I think a lot of what I've reflected on with this whole, with all of it, is every generation, it's not enough that you do those things. Every generation has to rediscover and appropriate, and I mean that in the correct use or the beneficial use of the word appropriation, has to appropriate faith for themselves. And so it's not enough just to do it. You have to appropriate it into your life and understand the meaning of that. So anyway, so I love Advent because I didn't grow. I grew up in a church. Well, first we were Baptist, then we went to a non-denominational, charismatic, Pentecostal mix of things. And I mean, it wasn't enough just to disregard a church calendar. You had to refer to seminary as cemetery.
Yeah. Of course, yeah.
Like it was we're talking low church here.
Yeah. And there's a beauty in that low church. I don't want to throw it out. You know, there's a beauty in low church in the sense of the ability to incarnate or enculturate the church and the gospel into a context that's maybe a lot more ready to jump into things, you know. So you flatten your leadership, you know. That's a great thing. You anyone can be a leader now. So there's some really, and I mean, like working in a movement like Crew, we tend to be very low, but we're not a church. So I guess that's the bit of the difference,
right?
You know, we're very flat. You know, it's like, what? Hey, you want to work for Crew? Great. You know, let's go. You know, and I think that
you're breathing and you believe in Jesus.
Yeah, and so I think churches for me that incorporate some of the structure, some of the solidity, some of the connection to tradition, but also know how to impact and empower people, right? Because that's, I mean, you know, in the New Testament, they're like, oh, hey, you're a new Christian, boom, and you know, the next day you're sharing your faith, you know, that's kind of the standard. And I think what were maybe the big high church structures, it was like, well, you gotta study, you know, you gotta put in 10 years before we're gonna even let you get close to the front of the church, and you know, and so that calcifies things a little bit.
And then you also have remnants in the high church structure of hereditary positions. So positions that were there because you were the third child in a family, you know, who traditionally had this position of bishop or whatever else. So that's what you were going to do. So that you get all those things. And so the further away you get from the meaningfulness of those things. So you have those remnants that are there, right? So then there's you're protecting the institution or the hoops that you had to jump through in order to get there because, well, this is what we had to do or whatever. Yeah. So there's a lot of good that came from this actually we stumbled into this transition,
this is good,
my friend, but this is great. So this does go to what we wanted to talk about today, just the phenomena of deconstructionism or deconstruction that's going on, which we've talked about before.
We've talked about in the past,
but good to bring up again. So there's this sense there of, on the one hand you have high church, on the other hand you have low church. The interesting phenomenon is you have people who are deconstructing from. So this does lead us into a really good transition. On the one hand, high church deconstruction and what's going on with so many people. I actually saw I haven't listened to it yet, but the Unbelievable podcast, if you're familiar with that podcast, just had a Orthodox priest who is also a musician, and Audrey Assad, who has just come out, the singer Audrey Assad. She's just come out and said, I've deconstructed.
Yeah, I saw that.
I'm no longer a practicing Catholic. I'm not even sure I want to listen to what she means by that, because she came out and said, I'm not a practicing Catholic. So what does that mean? I'm not so much in that world, but there is this phenomenon of deconstructing. And so you and I were talking about this article that Scott McKnight.
Yeah, the always excellent Scott McKnight.
He really is great. You know, he just came out with sponsored, because he does this series of he's the editor for a series of commentaries, and there was one that came out on Mark by Tim Gombis. It's phenomenal. It's really good. Love and listen to Gombis kind of goes through it on his podcast. But anyway, so deconstruction. You do have those two phases, but it's interesting to me that on the one side, there's a lot of people deconstructing their faith from institutional church or high church. And there's also people deconstructing their faith on the other side from low church. And these might be for different reasons. So I think it's really important to talk about, to be aware of, and to keep kind of rehashing here because
yeah.
So many people are deconstructing.
Yeah.
If we even know what that word means, do you even feel like you have a sense of what that word means?
Well, it's kind of fascinating because, deconstruction is technically a postmodern literary term that comes out, I think, mainly out of the 60s. If you went to college.
Foucault was he the
Foucault. I don't speak French.
Yeah, he studied a lot Tunisia. Of his work in Uppsala.
Oh, yeah, he was in Uppsala too, and he was in Tunisia. Yeah, he was an interesting guy. That possibly a pedophile, probably most likely. So
some of history's greatest thinkers are really disturbed people.
Yeah, who maybe were trying to figure out how to get around things. It's interesting. Yep. I don't want to, and that's still up in the air a little bit on his crimes, but we probably never know.
Well, let's just say his sexual morals were definitely laissez-faire.
Yeah, but we've come maybe a little bit full circle, even in even on the liberal side of things have kind of caught up a little bit. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But yes, deconstruct. So deconstructing was you would deconstruct the text, right? So you were, if you take a Hamlet or something in Shakespeare and deconstruct it, like what's really being said there, or what's the text behind the text. And so that's what deconstruct. Sorry. Anyway, I think that's what's killing my thing is someone's trying to call me and it switches over to 3G. Call me.
You're killing the podcast, Garrick. You're killing the podcast.
No puedo hablar ahora. Lo siento. Vale. Lo siento.
No so that's where deconstructionism is originally from those things.
Yeah, like literary, and then it moved in, obviously philosophy, and then you talk a lot about that it's kind of been co-opted into Marxism a little bit of or socio-critical theory and lots of things like that. So it's interesting that that's become a kind of a religious term as well.
Yeah. It's kind of like, so this is a phenomenon that I see happen with a lot of things. So it happens with CRT. The original academic theory or different things has value, validity to it. We need to wrestle with these things, talk about them. It's interesting. And then as it leaks out into popular culture, becomes something completely different, but the moniker stays with it. And then you end up having these debates as to, well, is that what it means or whatever else? And doesn't mean that the deconstruction that happens or the critical race theory, whatever it might be, isn't important. It just takes on a life of its own, I think. And so I think the deconstruction that's happening within the church for people, I was reading some comments in the section of the Scott McKnight article that you and I were discussing. And one guy was kind of like, hey, I'm kind of frustrated because you say it's really hard to define, but if you really get into it with all these people, you find, commonalities and this, that, and the other thing. But I think that seems to be McKnight's point is it's really hard to define because it's so personal for each person. So then he's trying to identify some themes and phases is what he identifies in it. So.
Yeah, I think so. What's interesting, I mean, there's going to be books and studies written on this phenomenon, but I think what's interesting is like, is this actually anything new? People always been kind of doing this, but because of the ability for social media and connections, has it kind of taken a life of its own, and it's got a name now, and there's kind of this, for lack of a better term, the social imaginary of these things. Because you see, when I look at it, I see a lot of the critiques. I say, yeah, of course, no one wants to be in a religion like that. That's not what Christianity is. I often feel like the deconstruction is are often critiquing things that I'm like, well, yeah, but that's not normal. That's not good. Like, you should deconstruct that. You should not be in a situation where that's the norm, or like that totally makes sense in most cases. In some cases, some of the things you're like, well, I'm not sure that's necessarily true per se, but okay. It's your sense of it. So I'm just wondering, is it something that's been going on? It's always been going on. People have always been walking away from the faith, or jumping from Catholic to evangelical, or evangelical to Catholic, and kind of it's just now, instead of you had to write a book and then get it print, now it's like, well, anyone can go, any two fools can have a podcast.
And the world is the worst for it. I mean, but in some sense, that actually this maybe is the perfect example of it. In that all the barriers to entry have been eliminated. So the barriers to getting the word out there of deconstructing has been eliminated, but also the fact that the internet exists, you can find two Yahoos doing a podcast. You can also find two Yahoos deconstructing. And I'm not saying that I want to be careful. Those who are deconstructing are not Yahoos. They've probably gone through their experiences are real. So I know quite a few people who have deconstructed the low church experience that I grew up with, and maybe even some of the not healthy experiences that they had. And I know people who have deconstructed some of the high church experiences that they've had, and then now are maybe even back in, even in some cases, Catholic Church, of some very good friends of mine. So I think I don't want to belittle the experiences that people have had, because they're real experiences. And
totally.
The hurt that has arisen from those things is real and does not need to be dismissed. Yeah. But what you're saying is that it's not. It's kind of like I'm trying to look for that. Sometimes I wonder if it's not like when I go on to my news feed and I read an article about a family of 4 who gets coronavirus, all 4 of them. 2 of them were vaccinated, 2 of them weren't, and 2 of them were in the hospital. And it is just gut-wrenching to read their story. It's hard not to then say this is happening everywhere. Yeah. Even though it's not happening everywhere, but it's a very real story. And so anyway, I think we have to be careful with that when we
certainly
consider, and there's stories of deconstruction.
Yeah. And there's certainly valid, because I think there's two tends to be two storylines we see. One is real pain, so something, but the other is just, I have some qualms. Okay, well, that's cool. Like Rhett and Link would be Rhett and Link, even they in their podcast when they left the faith, even say, well, yeah, Christianity gave us this huge platform, and basically we wouldn't be who we are without Crew, and Crew was the crazy people who let it, so when they talk about their experience of being in the evangelical or Christian world, it's generally positive. Mm-hmm. It's just like, well, but we didn't like a few things, or we didn't really, at some point, we just didn't believe these things anymore. We had a few qualms, but they didn't have, there was no pain, and so there are those people who don't. I think there's kind of two things going on there. Some it's, wow, really horrific experience. Some of it's just like, I just didn't agree anymore with that stuff. Okay, and those qualms could be are valuable questions, I think, because they're they hit at the core of who we are as Christians in some sense. Yeah, what do we really believe?
It kind of, I get what you're saying. So okay, McKnight points to 3 phases of deconstruction. Mm-hmm. I don't think he means these though sequentially. I just think he means, from what I understood, that they can occur and not necessarily all at the same, not necessarily in this order or all at the same time or whatever. Yeah. So liminality, elimination, and liberation. Liminality meaning it's kind of he calls it a point of change or decision. So he says deconstruction for many is something like a halfway house between confining church experiences, release, preparation, and eventually re-socialization. Mm-hmm. So they're kind of trying to figure themselves out, in other words. I see this one a ton with people but I think, I wonder to some extent if everyone is just deconstructing all the time or to take the term of deconstruction, but if someone isn't just trying to understand the world, it's called, in some sense, gosh, I want to be careful. We all go through a process of trying to obtain wisdom. And by nature, wisdom teaches us that as we get older, the things I thought when I was a child and the way that I perceive them are not exactly as how they are. Let me readjust what I'm thinking on those things in order to understand them better. So, when I was a kid, my parents sent me to my room for doing X. I thought they were unjust. As I've gotten older, I've come to understand they did the right thing. Yeah. That's a form of deconstruction. This is just happening. I'm maybe it's not deconstruction, but I'm figuring things out. I'm reevaluating things in order to understand. I think the hard part is that we have to evaluate things, and we need to make sure that we're evaluating things moored to the correct standards of truth and goodness, rather than, I just didn't like that.
Yeah. Well, I think, that's the question, is why is this happening? Why are people walking away? And then, I kind of agree with you. I don't think it's that much. It just feels very, because there's been some high profile ones, and it's painful. That's because we're people who are about relationship with Jesus. We want people to be in relationship with Jesus. And so when people walk away, part of it, we set ourselves up for a little bit of disappointment of, especially sometimes we put a mantle on people who, especially of saying, I think it's hard when certain, even famous or people that with clout who we really liked, walk away or have some kind of thing. So, but we kind of set ourselves up for a little of that, we put a lot of pressure on people to conform to our standards. And that's probably one reason why people are leaving the church in some sense, because there's that built-in pressure. But I think what McKnight kind of says is the thing. He says, I think, and this is interesting, but this is my question for you, is like, McKnight seems to think that the main thing this is happening is that people are looking for real community, real connection, real, and a faith that fits into that connection. And they did not, what they found was really individualism, Gnosticism, where faith and praxis have been divided in our churches. I don't know what that's why I always kind of want to, what is happening here? I can see a million reasons, and you hear a lot of reasons, but that seems what McKnight focuses in. How do you see that? Do you think that's a proper diagnosis?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I think he's on to something. Mm-hmm. As I read it, I was reminded of the big sort, or the attitude that Europeans adopted after World War I and World War II. So World War I is this result of this massive, strong nationalism that wouldn't let people back down. And they get to the end of World War I, and I mean, this is a gross summary of World War I, but or a very quick, but this feeling for so many Europeans of like, here are these institutions and these leaders who said for country and for glory, and you just offered us in front of the great industrial killing machine where millions and millions of people died. What was that for your vanity? And so you have this huge loss in institutional nationalism, and at the same time you have Bolshevism and all this stuff arising throughout the world. So where when you get to the end of World War II, so many Europeans were kind of like, I'm not trusting any institution, especially church and everything else. And the church had its own problems. And so there was a great resorting. I think there was a massive deconstruction that happened. and lack of trust.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you see that occurring within the church on a lesser, or I don't want to say lesser scale, but in a different way, so that people say, wait a second, this Jesus community seems to have been important, yet my parents and some of the institutions that existed before aren't providing that community. So one great example of this would be what's called side B viewpoint on homosexuality, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I was listening to a great podcast the other day, Preston Sprinkle, Theology in the Raw. If any of the listeners don't listen to that podcast, you should. He covers a lot of really great stuff on sexuality. And he had on this other guy who has his own podcast called Life on Side B. And he is a professing homosexual. Well, he's side B. So anyway, he went from the time he was 4 years old, attracted to men. He worked in the sex industry at one point, came out, went through, conversion therapy like 10 times, and eventually landed side B. And he's chosen to remain celibate, but he's looking for true community. And he's looking for a depth of relationship, and is proposing, some of the cool things that he talks about that I think is attached to some of this deconstruction of faith is the old system that we had, specifically as it relates to sexuality. It's just a little too simplistic and a little too rigid in order to understand the world as we know it today. Mm-hmm. And so that becomes very off-putting for a lot of people who see and know people who are of a certain sexual orientation or trying to figure things out. And so if you don't fit into that, where do you go? And there's a desire for true and lasting community, but the church is pretty rigid in that many or most churches say, no, the only place for true community is the family. And we just kind of meet on Sundays and we maybe have a cup of coffee. And so people go, but I want true community. And there's that wrestling there of what does that mean? So I absolutely agree. And I'm not doing justice to this idea of this community that this guy was putting forward, but I do think, he's longing for a community of friends and church that really gets into his life, not just meets on Sunday. And I think there's something true to that, not just putting on, okay, you dress up in your Sunday best and look really good for people.
Yeah. And that maybe it's like maybe a transformational community that's much more active than I think it's a tricky thing because on one hand the church structures that we have right now, just say in America, on one hand, have been very successful, and you can, I think you can find those communities here and there, but they tend to be more organic. And I'm not, but we, because by and large, America's put a big bet down on the mega church, right? That's kind of where things have gone. And, like, once again, there's some really great things about that. The ability to garner a lot of resources. I mean, there's great churches all over the country that, because they are able to group 5,000 to 10,000 people together on a regular basis and point them in certain directions, that there's churches in Dallas I know of who, when COVID happened, they bought a warehouse. They started buying up food, putting together care package, and started delivering to underserved communities within a few days. That they knew that and so that's something that can happen and that can be really transformational and impact a lot of lives, and that work with churches and boom, boom, boom. But what you give up on some of that is sometimes the ability maybe to build to build real community that's touching the lives of the people who are actually a part of it across the board.
Right. And to experience it's interesting to so there's a German phrase that came about in the, I don't know exactly when it was, but it was a kind of industrialization and the great migration of people from the country to the city. And it basically translate city air makes you free. And there's this idea that, look, if you grew up in the village and you knew people, that was true community, but everyone knew your business. And so you really had to watch yourself and, all these things. But once you move to the city where you're a little bit more autonomous and anonymous, then you can more or less do what you want. But it also means it makes you free in the sense of that things are more accessible in the city. So there's these, it's a double-edged sword in some ways, or there's positives and negatives with it. I think in a lot of ways, a smaller church, or maybe doesn't even have to be a smaller church. It could just be a group of people within a bigger church, but who have quote unquote true community. There is the reality there that it sort of cuts both ways. There is the opportunity for great and meaningful community, but there also is the opportunity for an experience of, let's say, a very close-hand experience of the sinfulness of man. So it's up close in your face, rather than my embodied pastor on the stage, who I've never met, failed. That's a different. At the end of the day, what I felt like McKnight was talking about a little bit was just this idea of basically, what it seems to me is not just do people want community, but they also want to see character. Because he comes back to this idea that they want to see, they like Jesus, they like his justice, they like who he is. They don't like what he's been represented to be, and they're a little bit disenchanted with their leaders or certain things that have been propagated within the church. And I really do think you and I have seen this when we've talked about leadership. The Bible often doesn't talk about skills as a leader, actually never really talks about skills as a leader. It talks about character of a leader and character of a believer. And it seems to me that we don't talk about character. So that's one thing. I don't think we talk about character
I agree.
enough.
100%.
And the other thing, or we don't develop godly character anymore. Or I don't know the best way. Surely we develop godly character, but maybe it's not.
Maybe that was prized.
We need to prize that. We need to.
So there's also another thing I wonder here, because I mean, I'm Gen X. I expect leaders to be idiots. I just be honest with you. I mean, that's my. So when I get a good leader,
like teen spirit.
When I get a good leader, I'm like, oh, this is a good guy. So I'm used. I'm kind of like, this is things are gonna go haywire, right? It's just that's the way it is. I don't know if that's generational and it's me. I just but have we oversold? So that's the other thing. Have we oversold the church to people when we should? So the famous the great song, the great gospel song by U2. You broke the bones, loose the chains, carry the cross of my shame. I believe it, but I still haven't found what I'm looking for. And so when that song came out, a lot of people saw that as a denial, like, they're leaving the faith because they still haven't found what they're looking for. And what it was no. They're saying that, we believe this. We believe this is going to happen, but we live in the now, and the now is broken. And that we do not. So we see the lights. We see sometimes the inbreaking of the Holy Spirit into our lives. We see good things, but we're still in a messed up world. And so I'm wondering if that's, to riff a little bit, is that something that we didn't communicate well to generations of Christians, to say, we don't have all the answers. We don't have, going to a church isn't going to necessarily make your life better. It should change your life at some level, right? Or being a Christian should change your life. But we oversell because of, because I feel like we hyper, how many times even in Crew, which great organizations love Crew, but you hear, this is the thing that's going to change the world. And then a few months later, like, well, this is, and so it's always this overselling, and it's a very American thing too. So I don't want to, a lot of the countries would never do these things. They wouldn't say, well, that's not going to work. I mean, obviously, but we'll give it a shot.
In my little corner of Spain, there's no overselling, my friend.
Yeah, there's no, things aren't undersold. But do we oversell? And so people have these kind of expectations, and what they needed to be in was, yes, community. Yes, find the true Jesus. And do we mess up on? But do we also just not disciple people into understanding what the stakes really are?
Yeah,
and that there are people who, that was for the early disciples. That was what they were doing. They were waking up every day going, is this the day I get thrown into jail? Is this the day I get stoned? Yeah. And there's, and certainly they saw power. They saw God's power manifest in a lot of ways. But, so have we even sold, cheap grace in some sense? And so it's been easy for people to go, well, this stuff doesn't work, Well,
so what's interesting is McKnight's talking about it. You get the sense that what people want a certain authenticity, right?
Yeah.
So they want, but what I also think is there is an authenticity that gets produced, which isn't authenticity at all, but it's produced from up front in the stage, which it becomes an excuse for bad behavior and makes people very cynical towards, hey, we're all a work in progress. Here's how I failed. That's not truly authentic. That's just kind of having a good sermon illustration. So you're using authenticity I want to be careful. We have to be careful not to manipulate people via that.
Yeah.
So then I think you hear the now but not yet can become an excuse for some as to why they don't yet have character. And our friend, former staff member, Mac Michelatos, actually, he may still be on staff. I'm not sure. I know he's leaving. He may have already left. I don't remember when that's happening.
Yeah.
But he wrote in his last book, I saw this on Twitter or Facebook or something, someone was quoting, but I thought it was fantastic. When we mess up and we go to someone and we should, there's this tendency to say, hey, that's just not me to have done that. He said, that's a very dismissive and excuse-filled way of interacting with someone. He suggested what we should say is, I don't want that to be true of me.
Yeah.
And so I felt like that was a fantastic way of you have integrity, you're owning up to what you've done. The second thing is you're saying, it's not how I want to be. And I recognize it. So it's a now, but not yet kind of way of looking at that. And it's truly authentic. I thought it was a fantastic way, but we don't often present it that way. And those kind of things are very hurtful. So if you grow up in the church and you're hearing hurtful ways of defending yourself. So at the end of the day, when you're encountering humanity, because what I get frustrated with this whole deconstruction conversation and with people who have or are deconstructing is to go from one idealized version of something to a differently idealized version of something. Yeah. And you just can't have the idealized. You have to embrace the fact that you're going to, so if what you're wanting to avoid in your deconstruction is humanity, so if you're saying we should be more like X because I experienced Y, guess what? You're always going to experience Y. How do you navigate Y, the reality of Y in the world that we live while if what you don't like is power in the church, well, don't think you're not going to find power struggles somewhere else. You're always going to find power struggles.
Yeah.
So what is true and beautiful and integrity filled is Jesus Christ. Cling to that, eschew that which is not. Anyway, so I think that's the struggle that we have to go to.
Yeah. I totally agree. I think too what Menice here is, he's maybe focusing a little bit on people who reconstruct, and so I think that the hopeful side of it
that's true.
Is that people who, there are people who deconstruct and just they're gone, but there are other people who deconstruct, and I think this is more of there's a healthier sense of that, which then there's a reconstruction of faith, so you maybe change churches or you realize. And a lot of people, what I see is a lot of people tend to come out of backgrounds that have some fundamentalist baggage, right? So not maybe not pure fundamentalism, not pure living in the woods wearing overalls, kind of King James only kind of, I'm trying to picture it in my mind, but more, people had some things that were generally, I think, orthodox, because I would almost put pure fundamentalism, I would almost put it in, it's not orthodox Christianity. That's my thing. I don't even consider them, but that fundamentalism has kind of affected certain elements of Christianity, Catholic also, and so you have those things that are kind of the background, or maybe a key component, but it's not the whole story. And so I think people, for good, there's been that sense, oh, well, not everything was bad, as long as, and so I think he's trying to point out, how can we help people reconstruct, as they come out of that. And he comes up with, he's got these words, like kind of things that, Jesus, he's, obviously Jesus is the key, justice, model, about modeling, I think, for people what it really looks like to follow Jesus, salvation, that needs to still be a key part to the process.
I was really glad he brought up salvation.
Yeah.
In so much of the deconstructing and reconstructing conversation, I think in part, my new analogy is this. Well, I think in part because it was such a big hot topic for so long in American Christianity, and maybe we went off the rails a little bit, oversimplified it. People kind of go, I'm bored with that conversation. And so there's just so much that goes into it. They go, well, this part isn't important. And salvation is actually really important.
Yeah.
But it needs to be reclaimed. It needs to be rethought through. Interesting that he talks about dispensationalism. I am a dispensationalist, but I think the dispensationalism that he wants to rail against is the perverted, oversimplified, ridiculous version, rather than maybe a more progressive dispensationalism than I am. But some of that kind of, it's all about your soul and everything else is going to burn. There's that revisiting of, well, what is salvation? Is it a whole salvation? Because I actually think true biblical salvation, the anticipation of the return and the restoration and the recreation of the world, is actually more beautiful than any kind of materialism or progressive anticipation of what the world could be.
Yeah.
It actually is a more hope-filled message of, no, like it's more earthy than what will we do in the kingdom? What will be sitting on clouds? No, we'll be seeing the earth in all of its, in an even better glory than it ever was. And so I think there's a lot there. I love that he brings salvation back into it, because I think that's such an important piece of the conversation, and something that I think the church would do well to revisit.
Yeah.
And pastors and theologians and workers would do well to not just revisit, but I think refine and come back with a more robust view of salvation. I've long said, like, I with Swedes, it was always this conversation. It was kind of like, well, I don't really believe that there's much to this world. So this whole salvation that you're offering me of forgiveness of sins, because at the end of the day, what does it really matter? I want to enjoy my life here. Or they had a really hard time grasping an eternity that wasn't earthy, because they're materialists in some way. And so it was hard to imagine, well, why would God save me to not be earthy? I am earthy. Like, this is my reality. And it was such a strong reality for them. So I would spend a lot of time talking with Swedes about the idea that, no, part of the salvation, the forgiveness of sins, is the introduction into the eventual salvation that we're anticipating, not the ends and the means. And when I grew up, salvation was simply forgiveness of sins, entrance into kingdom of heaven, fire insurance, which, hey, is pretty darn important. So let's not underestimate,
throw that out.
Yeah. But I think so many people became desensitized to it, much like the abortion conversation. So right now, conversations are going on in the US about Roe v. Wade, and it's kind of a non-issue politically among a lot of church-going people.
Yeah.
And there's discussion about whether or not that's because church-going people don't care anymore. And I just think that it's because we got so used to the fact that Roe was a part of our lives, that abortion exists, that it's kind of like, I'm just tired of that conversation. I think that's kind of similar to the salvation thing. Sorry, soliloquy over.
No, I think that's right. And I think that's really what he's, and I think that's why he puts it high up, because, McKnight's he's a dyed-in-the-wool evangelical Christian. So salvation, if you're evangelical, salvation can't walk away or be thrown out. But I think we did do a disservice to the church in general when we've made it almost as that very simplistic, say a prayer, you're in, we've done our job, and there's a lot more to it. And it's a lot bigger than it should be big. It's cosmic salvation, that we're caught up in, and we're saved and we're forgiven of our sins. But there's a whole story that's going on there, and it's a lot bigger. So I agree 100%. I think that's probably what some people are intuiting of like, well, I signed off on this agreement, and I'm not seeing what I wanted to see. I think what I think is also fascinating is he hits on some things that you and I've talked a lot about as far as even just evangelism, this idea of friendship precedes fellowship. So you've got to build trust, this honesty and humility. I think humility is really just needs to be something the church, we all learn again, being honest, we don't have to have all I think that's that's where I kind of keep going back to this U2 thing of like, maybe we have just oversold everything.
Yeah.
We're so sure of it. We're so, there's like a new movie or something, the 6 Day Creation has got coming out where they're like, we're sure it's 6 days. Like, you're not sure. And who cares? This doesn't have anything to do with anything, really.
Right.
I mean, you can believe in it, great, but we're in a situation that doesn't affect the defining moment of our faith. It's not the defining moment it's an important part. And what we get from the Bible is God created the world and God is behind it. Great. How did he do it? I don't know. Why do we have to know that?
Right.
God, and what we also know historically is that a guy named Jesus lived, walked around, was killed, and then something happened. Yep. Christians would say he was resurrected. How was he resurrected? I don't know. I don't have to know that. We got to live in some mystery, I think. And
see, that's the word. It's not. Humility, I think, is probably the proper word, because humility allows for mystery. Yeah. But I do think it's important for us to say mystery, because I think the world is longing for mystery. Someone might say enchantment. That's the Murray way of saying it, and there's been people the loss of enchantment of the world, but I do think that the world does long to have mystery. There's too much information out there for us to go, I know everything with certainty. And so the Christian does well to say, yeah, it's a mystery. Growing up in a lot of the events that I would have gone to as a young Christian would not have allowed for mystery.
Yeah.
There is no mystery. Certainty was the most important thing. And I get why we did that. It was some way responding. It was a response to the certainty that others were giving us. And so the doubts that creeped in, and we didn't want our children to have doubts. And look, there are certain things that we can be certain about, but there is also a sense of, there was so much certainty that turned out to be wrong, or that new information has made us go, whoa, wait a second, how would that work? That I think we really do need to embrace as Christians a lot of the mystery. The fact that, okay, God mentioned 7 days, not really sure how all that's put together. Okay, I'm going to accept that there could be some variation in those things. Or even, what is it going to be like in the kingdom? Like my son asked me the other day, Dad, it says in the Bible that we won't be married in heaven? Or no, it was my daughter.
Yeah.
So what are you and Mom going to do?
Yeah.
It was just kind of like, she was trying to go. And I think when I was growing up, I think my parents would probably said, yeah, I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
But I know a lot of people who would have gone, okay, I got to hit this with certainty.
Yeah.
And my response was, yeah, I got no clue. That one's weird to me.
Yeah.
Then I think that there's some, but here, this goes to that side B conversation, because this guy went to that verse and said, our relationships will be so deep in the kingdom to come that sexuality becomes unimportant. And it was like, whoa, that's big. That's important for us to pick up as Christians. And it was a good thing to think about. But anyway, I didn't go to that with my kids, but But
yeah, you didn't. Yeah. So
well, Riley, you see.
So this weekend I watched this movie Stalker. It sounds bad, but it's not. It's a Russian sci-fi movie. It was made in '79 by Andrei Tarkovsky, which is a famous Christian filmmaker. And Stalker is considered probably one of the top 20 films, non-American films, but foreign language films ever made. It's usually top list. It's kind of a difficult film to watch, but it's about belief in God. It is fundamentally about the existence of God. And this is one of the reasons Tarkovsky was eventually had to leave the Soviet Union, because he kept making movies that were clearly, crashing up against the Soviet system, which is there is no God. It's atheism. There's nothing out there, and he kept making all these mysterious movies. It's a great movie. It's got this great line in it that I thought was fantastic. These two guys are having, he's taking these, a scientist and a writer into this zone where there's a room in the zone that will give you your deepest wish. Right. And so these guys, they've paid him, he's taken them there. And there's a lot of parallels to the road to Emmaus. There's a lot of stuff going on here. Pilgrimage is going on here. It's a fascinating movie. But at one point they're talking about the meaning of life and what does all this mean? And the writer's talking about like, what does it all mean if I'm going to write these words, but they'll be gone in 100 years, whatever. Scientists too. And finally the stalker says, he goes, it's interesting how he said, are you awake? You were talking recently about the meaning of our life, unselfishness of art. Let's take music. It's really least of all connected, to say the truth. If it is connected at all, then in an idealist way, mechanically, with an empty sound, without associations. Nonetheless, the music miraculously penetrates into the very soul. What is resonating in us in answer to the harmonized noise, and turns it for us into a source of great delight, and unites us and shakes us? What is its purpose? And above all, for whom? You will say for nothing and for nobody, just so, unselfish. Though it's not so, perhaps, for everything in the end has its own meaning, both the meaning and the cause. So you read that and you're like, he's talking clearly about God, but he's also talking clearly about the mystery of our lives. Yeah. How does music, why does music unite people? Why does music make us feel something? It doesn't make any sense, right? But,
right.
And so, but we've grown up in contexts where we would never talk about those things, right? We would never allow, and so I think you're right. This lack of ability to talk about mystery and to say, yeah, I don't know these things, but I do know, maybe we're getting a little too mystical, but I do know music does something to us.
Well, what's fascinating is interestingly enough, as you were saying that, I grew up, because of some of my charismatic background, I grew up with an imagination for mystery. But when it came to questioning things about God, there was no imagination. Yeah. So it was like someone, I could very well hear someone offering a defense of God to be mystery of, wow, like, isn't it amazing the way that we feel connected with the spirit when we listen to worship music and my soul, and there's something. But what I found from the rest of Christianity, or maybe even certain circles, was dismissed very quickly.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that the charismatics and Pentecostals have had right is, wait a second.
There's some mystery.
Yeah. Like there's lots of mystery, and we can be connected to it without knowing it, without how do you say it, without controlling it.
Yeah.
And and so I think that is important. Is it James K. Smith goes to that film quite a bit.
He does. Okay.
Yeah. He loves that filmmaker. And
Tarkovsky.
So you really, I need to see that movie. The way he talks about it is fascinating.
Yeah, it's an interesting movie. I mean, it's not an easy, because he's a guy who was very much he wrote a book called Sculpting in Time, and so everything it's very Wes Anderson-esque, right? Everything that's happening in the scenes is pushing you emotionally. So there's these long scenes that just feel really drawn out and exhausting, but he's doing that for a reason. He's actually trying to exhaust you mentally and make you feel like a little
Norm Macdonald.
It's like a Norm Macdonald joke, right? But you get to the point, and there's this satisfying, and he even was, but there are movies you really have to kind of lean into and strain to get, but it's a little bit like Malick as well, which some people will go, well, that's just kind of pure over the top stuff, but the message, what he's getting, and the philosophy and the theology and the themes that are coming out, and you can see why. I mean, it's in some sense the movie doesn't seem that, for us, from our perspective as Americans, it seems a little bit maybe obvious in some things. But if that movie's made 1979, the Soviet Union is being shown, it is a groundbreaking movie,
right?
In what he's trying to communicate and the way he's trying to communicate it, it's fascinating. Unfortunately, the footnote of Stalker was they filmed it in Tallinn in a old abandoned like industrial warehouse, and they were inhaling like basically toxic fumes the whole time, and so the main actor Tarkovsky and his wife all died like just within 15 years after that of cancer. Yeah, and they're pretty sure. Some other people involved it. They're pretty sure it's because they were in this, in this place.
So there is a there's a good reason for environmental activism.
Yeah.
And not to let people oh gosh, there are so many great stories of the Soviet Union, of things that they just, one of my favorites is the we probably need to close with
let's close with this.
So well, anyway, before I go, we'll close with a funny story, but McKnight closes in his article, and I think it's awesome. The motto for the Reconstructors is "I see them," and he just quotes James 1:22-27, the passage of "Be doers of the word and not merely hearers who deceive themselves." I love that he went there. For me, James is so often misunderstood. James is trying to get really practical and say, at the end of the day, this is what your faith comes down to. And and this is why it's important to do those things. So James is not high theological as to, the James 2, where everyone wants to make that into a, are you in or out conversation.
Yeah. James
is trying to say, look, if we're saying we're believers, then this, and he gets to this. And I do think, so if there's any conversation that needs to happen about, well, what do we do about people who are deconstructing? It's not, how do we meet their questions and how do we protect and what fences do we set up? It's for everybody involved, no matter where you're at, find a simple faith of be a doer of the word, not just a hearer of the word. We need character to be developed in us. And we are what we love. And so find Jesus, love him, and we do what we love. And so do those things that Jesus would do.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think being compassionate and listening, humility, I think those are all not to be shocked by people going through something or leaving the faith, but to be compassionate, to listen, because most people are waiting for the reaction. That's what not that that's not what they want. They don't want that, but that's what they're expecting. The expectation now is I'm going to put something online and it'll be attacked by, and even maybe my friends won't know what to do or say to me. And it's hard. They're going through something because they are leaving stuff behind.
Yeah.
But I think there is some beauty in what's happening there, because they're trying to really find the true Jesus. But we need to be compassionate. We need to listen. We need to be humble, and we need to evoke a pilgrim. It wouldn't be a Rabbit Trails podcast if we didn't mention pilgrimage. To be a pilgrim with people, to walk alongside them, and not walk away from them. I think it's.
Yeah, and there's that liminality, right? Is the pilgrimage idea.
So right, funny Soviet story.
Well, and this is a lesson for. So I don't want to, the easy thing to do as an American is to take anything Soviet and go, well, that was dumb.
Yeah.
And look, there's a lot of problems with every culture and every system. I think it's more a product of central control and centralized thinking. So groupthink that can happen within that. So Soviet Union decides, so this is in the Baltics, there is a weed that if the sap gets on you and sunlight touches you so if you touch this leaf, so it's like a poison ivy sort of thing. If it touches you and touches your bare skin, it breaks down your body's ability to protect against UV light. And so you end up with 3rd and 4th degree burns on your skin as a result from the sunshine. And so in order to take care of this, I call it death weed. There's a name for it.
Well, thankfully there's no sunshine in the Baltic. So
yeah, that's right.
Just kidding. I love the Baltic.
It comes from the plains of Kazakhstan. Because it gets brutally cold in the plains of Kazakhstan. And so this weed dies back every year, and then it comes back, but it's mostly controlled because it dies back so much. But the Baltics doesn't get cold enough to really kill this weed off. But some person in centralized government in the Soviet Union thought, hey, this weed grows really fast. It's full of nutritious value. What if we want to grow cattle in the Baltics because they have good flat land? We can turn it into pasture and we can grow this weed and feed it to cattle. So let's go ahead and ship it over there. We'll grow it there and feed it to the cattle. So they did. They sent it over there and it grew like crazy. The problem is cows don't like it. So they have all this weed growing all over the Baltics. I encountered it in Latvia when I was there. And but they can't kill it off because there's nothing will eat it. No animal likes the taste of it, and it doesn't get cold enough in the Baltics to kill it off enough to actually do anything about it. So they actually have to go out completely like covered in hazmat suits in the middle of the night when there's no moon in order to get rid of this stuff, to try to control it, to beat it back, because it just keeps it just keeps coming problem. So you've got farmers who are encountering it, who are getting mauled by, getting burned by this. Anyway, so it's just it's kind of stage one thinking. I'm often when I think about in leadership, when I'm thinking about like, okay, what do we do here? I can come up with a really good idea. But I need someone needs to go, well, wait a second. Do the cows like it?
Do the cows like it? Yeah. Oh, I know. But
anyway, with that, always ask yourself, do the cows like it?
Do the cows like? That's the title of a book right there, Barry. You should start writing a leadership book. Do the cows like it?
That's true. I can go on tour and anyway, may my cynicism stop there. Well, Garrick, despite our technical difficulties today, I think a profitable conversation. Looking forward to the next time we get together. And buen camino.
Buen camino.